Nanalo ng Family Feud ng Team Canosa ng 200,000 pesos.
Family Feud, 5:35 p.m.
Welcome to my episode that is called
That's okay.
President Trump on Saturday night, which are raising questions about security and what law enforcement knew. The suspect, who allegedly charged through security, had sent a manifesto to his family, outlining his plans and mocking security at the hotel. In it, the suspect, identified as 31-year-old Cole Thomas Allen, called himself the Friendly Federal Assassin. That's according to a law enforcement official with knowledge of the document who spoke to Reuters. Washington correspondent Andy Sullivan has more.
So in this manifesto, he explains a lot about the hierarchy of his actions, who he's targeting, basically senior administration officials, trying not to hurt hotel staff, etc. But he doesn't really get into detail about why he's doing this, what particular actions by the administration that he really doesn't like. And he says turning the other cheek when someone else is oppressed is not Christian behavior, it's complicity in the oppressor's crimes.
The author of the manifesto also describes what he called a sense of arrogance in the hotel, in that he could walk in with multiple weapons and, quote, not a single person considered the possibility that he was a threat.
He actually spends a lot of time criticizing the Secret Service for their way they set up the event. This event is held in the basement ballroom of a hotel, and while the event is going on, people can do normal hotel activities. They can check into their rooms, they can hail cabs, etc. So they had security around the ballroom, but you could get into the hotel, and he talks about this, and he says this is a crazy security breach.
It wasn't just Trump at the dinner. There were a number of top US officials there too, including Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, and FBI Director Kash Patel. White House correspondent Jacob Bogage, who also attended, describes his experience with security.
There are features that are added to the entrance of the hotel and the back of the hotel to make it safer for dignitaries to enter and exit. Security was both light and heavy at some points. I had my invitation in an envelope. All I did was show somebody the outside of the envelope and they let me through. In one case, I took the invitation out and I kind of flashed it. It could have been anything, Nobody actually saw the invitation and let me through.
Wow. President Trump, speaking to Fox News on Sunday, called the suspect a pretty sick guy, adding that the suspect's family had expressed concerns to law enforcement about him in the past. But the president also used the moment to promote his narratives. Here's Jacob Bogage again.
To Donald Trump, this is a sign of the power of his presidency. This is a sign to him that people are noticing the vast changes he's making in the United States government, in the U.S. and global economy, and that people are noticing and feeling them and reacting to that.
The president is also saying this is another reason his ballroom needs to go ahead.
The White House actually does not have a very large event space. And so he's claiming that had this event been held there instead of at one of Washington's larger hotels, that this attack would not have occurred.
A spokesperson for Britain's King Charles and Queen Camilla say their planned visit to the US, which kicks off today, is going ahead, despite the shooting in Washington. Kate Holton in London has more.
relations between the two countries have been deteriorating. Keir Starmer had done a pretty good job previously of building strong ties with the US president, but they have been hugely strained by Britain's reluctance to get involved in the war in Iran, particularly its initial refusing to allow the US to use British bases for its attack. That initial decision has caused deep strains, and so the government is hoping that this trip will help rebuild ties. It is well known that Donald Trump is a big fan of the royal family. He had 2 state visits to Britain before, which were both very successful. And so obviously security had to be reviewed after this shooting at the weekend, but the British particularly, and I believe the President, are very keen that this visit goes ahead as planned.
Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is in Russia today, due to meet with President Vladimir Putin as diplomacy to end the war with the United States stalls. Araghchi arrived after shuttling between mediators in Oman and Pakistan. President Donald Trump, meanwhile, told Fox News that Iran can call Washington if it wants talks, saying there is a phone and secure line. The issue of whether Iran should be allowed to enrich uranium, however, remains a key sticking point. Amid the economic turmoil driven by the war with Iran, a trade truce between the US and China is still holding. But behind the scenes, Beijing has been quietly building new sources of leverage. Since agreeing to de-escalate tariffs, China has expanded export controls, tightened supply chain rules, and rolled out new legal tools that could help it long after the truce expires. Reuters' China politics and policy correspondent Mei Mei Chu is in Beijing.
So one of the biggest shifts here we've seen is China hardwiring some of these economic coercion tools into legal countermeasures. It has introduced this month alone 2 new regulations, and these regulations give the authorities powers to investigate foreign companies, countries, and even individuals. This can be over accusations of discriminating against China's supply chains, which means if a company tries to move their supply chain out of China, that gives China an excuse to investigate these foreign companies and even seize their assets. At the same time, we've also seen China tightening some of its pressure points in their critical supply chains. China strengthened its export licensing regime for rare earths. It has asked state-funded data centers to stop using foreign AI chips, and China uses a lot of US advanced AI chips. And it has also asked Chinese companies to stop using US and Israeli cybersecurity software.
Mei Mei says for China, the trade truce they agreed with the US was proof of their leverage with their control of rare earths. And the US-Iran war provided even more impetus.
China buys more than 80% of Iranian oil. In mid-April, US threatened to sanction buyers of Iranian oil and to impose secondary sanctions on Chinese banks. After those threats, the Chinese-linked social media account responded with a commentary. And in this commentary, it said that trade pools alone are no longer sufficient. What they need now are legal countermeasures, and that's exactly what we saw.
For a look at more econ and markets news for the week ahead, tune into our sister podcast, Morning Bid, available wherever you get your podcasts.
Le décès tragique du général de corps d'armée Sadio Camara.
Malian government spokesperson Brigadier General Issa Ousmane Coulibaly announces the death of Defense Minister Sadio Camara. He was killed when a suicide attacker rammed his home with a car laden with explosives, triggering a firefight. It came during a wave of coordinated attacks by rebel fighters across the country over the weekend. Regional al-Qaeda affiliate Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal Muslimin and another rebel group made up of mostly Tuareg fighters have claimed responsibility for the attacks. Jury selection begins today in Elon Musk's lawsuit against OpenAI and its co-founder Sam Altman. On Friday, a US judge dismissed Musk's fraud claims after Musk himself asked for them to be dropped to narrow the case for juries. The trial will now focus on whether OpenAI broke legal obligations tied to its original non-profit mission after creating a for-profit arm. The case is being closely watched as a potential test of who ultimately controls the direction and future of advanced AI. And finally, a barrier that once seemed impossible has fallen. Kenya's Sebastian Sawe has become the first man to run a marathon in under 2 hours in an official race, winning the London Marathon in 1:59:30. The feat came after years of engineered attempts and near misses. In an unusual display for London, the conditions were near perfect for fast running, with mild temperatures and light winds. For more on any of the stories from today, check out Reuters.com or the Reuters app. Don't forget to follow us on your favourite podcast player. If you're listening on a smart speaker, just ask for the latest news from Reuters 7 days a week. We'll be back tomorrow with our daily headline show.
That's it for your news updates. To see more stories, open Google News.